Over time, history has showed us that behind every successful man, there is a remarkable and great woman. But who are the women that stand behind the world's dictators? In good times and in bad, the wives of dictators put up with a lot, from corruption, murders, political uprisings, and often other wives. One cannot understand Robert Mugabe and his 37-year rule without looking into his wife, Grace Mugabe. Not so many things bring Zimbabweans together, but Grace did so in so many different ways. She was nicknamed Disgrace, First Shopper, Gucci Grace, among other names, by her detractors, both within the ruling party, ZANU-PF, and the opposition. Yet, to her supporters, she was a philanthropist and a businesswoman. To her, she preferred to be called Amai, meaning Mother of the Nation. This is the rise and double fall of Grace Mugabe. This story begins in a courtroom in March 1964. Robert Mugabe, a freedom fighter, is being tried. His crime is issuing subversive statements. The judge asks Robert to retract his statements, which he refuses to do. So, he is found guilty and is sentenced to Salisbury Maximum Security Prison for 21 months. While in prison, another inmate arrives. His name is Emerson Dambuzo Mnangagwa, the leader of a crocodile gang, who was convicted of blowing up a train. The two strike up a friendship that will be very important for the future of Zimbabwe, but for the purposes of this story, the life of Grace Mugabe, to which their friendship will be tested to the maximum. During this time, two migrants from Zimbabwe, Johnston Marufu and Ida Marufu, traveled to apartheid South Africa in search of work. They settle in a village called Benoni. On the 25th of July 1965, they give birth to their fourth child. They name her Grace Ntobozitwa Marufu, who would later become Grace Mugabe. In 1970, aged 5, Grace moved from Zimbabwe to join her mother, who had earlier left South Africa. However, her father stayed behind, working to support his family in Zimbabwe. While in Zimbabwe, Grace attended primary school in Chivu and high school at Christ Mambo. At the age of 19, she got married to Stanley Golilaza, an Air Force pilot, and together they had a son called Russell. Later, she joined college and got a secretarial qualification which landed her a life-changing job in the office of the president. At the office, Grace worked in a typing pool, where she had regular close encounters with President Mugabe, leading to one of the most significant office romances in Africa. The affair paid off for Grace, as she got promoted from a typing pool to Mugabe's personal assistant, a position that had her traveling with the president on both foreign and domestic trips. Things got serious, yielding two offsprings, a girl named Bona after Mugabe's mother and a boy, Robert Mugabe Jr. At that time, both were still married. Mugabe was married to Ghanaian-born Sally Hayfron, a companion from his fighting days. Sally was beloved in the country for her revolutionary pedigree, kindness, and her concern for the poor. However, none of that prevented Mugabe's adulterous encounters with Grace Marufu. Sally Hayfron died of kidney failure in 1992. When he lost Sally, some say Mugabe lost his moral compass. During the affair, Grace had not divorced his teenage Air Force sweetheart too. When it became public, Goreraza developed a drinking problem, leading to the end of the marriage. In August 1996, 31-year-old Grace married 72-year-old Mugabe in a lavish mega marriage ceremony that came to be known as the mother of all weddings. The event was attended by over 6,000 people, including Nelson Mandela and several other heads of state. Grace, a former personal assistant to the president, had now become the First Lady of Zimbabwe. In the position, powerful men and women would grovel before her and sing praises. Just a mere mention of her name would leave many quacking in their boots. She would later become the gateway to old Mugabe. She would decide what Mugabe had and what he responded to. Upombwe is a Chishona word of Mugabe's tribe, which means adultery. Now, this is what exactly Mugabe did with Grace before marriage. Well, according to tradition, this had consequences, meaning Mugabe had to pay a fine in form of cattle to the Air Force pilot, the former husband to Grace, and also pay one to the chief. However, Comrade Mugabe had other ideas. He dispatched the officer to China, claiming to be sending him for further studies. On completion, they posted Golelaza to the Zimbabwean embassy in Beijing as a defense attaché. While diplomats serve 4 to 5 years, Golelaza served 26 years at the station in Beijing until Mugabe's death. Mugabe's message was obvious. He was not taking any chances. In the early years of her marriage, Grace struggled to emerge from Sally's shadow. She was a quiet first lady, and not much was heard about her. She mainly focused on her charity work. However, quite early in her marriage, her life was marred with rumors of extramarital affairs with various high-profile and businessmen in the capital. Peter Pamire, a young, handsome, and upcoming businessman, died in an horrific car accident in 1996. The same year, Grace married Mugabe. The death of Pamire has remained mysterious in Zimbabwe. Allegations that he was shot before the accident have never been investigated. In fact, one of the intelligence officers revealed the news that he was part of a team that had been tasked to assassinate Pamire by the president. It is believed that Pamire was targeted because he was allegedly having an affair with Grace. The most recent was with Gideon Gono, who was the central bank governor, financial advisor, and political ally of Mugabe. Gono was also accused of having a 5-year affair with Grace. Mugabe found out about the affair when his sister Sabina revealed the scandal on her deathbed. Refusing to believe the allegations, the president later consulted his trusted bodyguard, Kane Chademana, who had sat in on the meeting with Sabina. Now, the bodyguard said he knew, but he thought it was best to keep quiet. Later, he was found dead amid speculations that he had been poisoned. When confronted about the alleged affairs, Grace denied all of them. For 18 years, Grace devoted her energies to lavish shopping trips rather than interfering in politics. Before travel bans were imposed on Zimbabwe's elite, Grace would borrow a plane from the National Fleet and head off for London or Paris. In London, she was a regular at Harrods, where she spent over £40,000 in a single afternoon. In Paris, she spent $75 in a single Paris shop. She justified spending thousands on her favorite designer shoes, saying, "I have narrow feet, so I only wear Ferragamo." During her daughter's wedding in 2014, she splashed £3 million of state funds on the event, treating herself to a £300,000 Rolls-Royce for the occasion. Before the couple were married, she used £500,000 of government funds to build a 30-bedroom mansion which she named Gracelands. When it was ruled that the loans taken out on the Harare property were illegal, she sold it to Gaddafi for £3 million and kept the profits. Her excessive spending was seen in some of her children. Russell, the eldest son from her previous marriage, imported 2 Rolls-Royce limousines into the country in 2017 using state funds. His half-brother Beleman Shatunga, whom Mugabe nicknamed the Undertaker for poor grades in school, filmed himself pouring £200 worth of champagne over his diamond-encrusted $60,000 watch. In the Snapchat video, Shatunga posted a caption saying, "60,000 on the wrist when your daddy ran the country, yeah no." During her 20th wedding anniversary, she bought herself a $1.35 million ring. Then suddenly, she cancelled the purchase after the diamond had already been prepared. She then demanded a refund from the dealer, telling him to wire the money to a bank account in Dubai. The dealer refused because he believed it would be considered as money laundering, but agreed to reimburse the First Lady in installments in a Zimbabwean bank. The furious Grace and her son Russell subsequently seized and occupied 3 of the dealer's properties in the capital Harare to teach him a great lesson. You do not mess with the Mugabes. In 2002, during Mugabe's agrarian revolution, which involved the redistribution of farms owned by white farmers, the First Lady was one of the beneficiaries. She personally evicted white farmers from a 2,500-acre iron mask estate, creating the biggest dairy company in Southern Africa, called Alpha and Omega. With all the wealth looted, she purchased homes in Dubai, South Africa, and Malaysia, with further reports of property holdings in Hong Kong, including a diamond-cutting business. In 2013, Grace launched one of her most ambitious projects, the Amai Mugabe School. She contracted a Chinese company to construct the school with funding from the Grace Mugabe Foundation, which was financed by taxpayers' money. In addition, the school used state funds to siphon more money through a STEM project. In the project, the government was paying school fees for 18 students amounting to over $200,000 per year. The unstoppable Grace was also the mastermind behind the Blue Roof Mansion, the official residence of the Mugabes. The property sits on 44 acres, with 25 bedrooms, each with an ensuite and a spa, plus a series of offices with an estimated value of $10 million. The opulent mansion was fenced off from the public and protected by a multi-million security radar system. It was against the law to take pictures of the house. WikiLeaks said the full extent of President Mugabe's assets are unknown, but are rumored to exceed $1 billion in value, and that was just in 2001. With all the wealth, pomp, and glamour that came with being the First Lady, reality daunted Grace that soon her aged husband won't be around for long. Without him, it would be hard for her to protect all the wealth and maintain the lifestyle. So she thought about a life without Mugabe, and for this, she would have to attempt something that would make or break what they have built. Grace Mugabe was going to give an attempt to the highest office in the land, the presidency. In 2014, the ruling party ZANU-PF confirmed Robert Mugabe as its candidate for the 2018 general election. At the time, Mugabe was 92 years old and had ruled the country for over 35 years, raising the possibility of Mugabe's rule lasting until 2023. By then, he would be 99 years old. So Grace started scheming. First, she identified that in the event the president dies, the constitution says the vice president takes over. So she had to become vice president by any means necessary. With the plan, she identified friends and allies. However, her political ambitions split the entire ZANU-PF party apart, creating deep factions that further stressed the old-aged Mugabe. By 2014, the First Lady's popularity had hit rock bottom. Besides, she wasn't that multi-talented. So, in order to raise her status among the people, especially the elite, she earned a PhD in sociology from the University of Zimbabwe in a record time of just 3 months. Her thesis was on the changing social structure and functions of the family, though it was never filed or has never been seen by anyone to this day. Nevertheless, her doctorate credentials were used on campaign material as she prepared to take over the leadership of ZANU-PF Women's Wing. In August 2014, ZANU-PF Women's League voted Grace as its chair, propelling her into the party's inner supreme decision-making body, the Politburo. The position launched Grace to attack anyone in her way to the presidency. Joyce Mujuru was a decorated veteran, a minister since 1980, and the vice president of Zimbabwe for 10 years. A widow of General Solomon Mujuru, who died in 2011 under unclear circumstances on her farm. Joyce enjoyed undeniable legitimacy. Being the vice president, she was the next in line in case Mugabe died, making her a perfect target by Grace. Grace Mugabe, with the help of Emerson Dambuzo Mnangagwa, the then Minister of Justice, launched a campaign against Joyce. They labeled her and called her all sorts of names, alleging that she was a conspirator determined to avenge her husband's death and seize power for herself. In December 2014, Joyce lost her position in the party leadership. Shortly afterwards, Mugabe dismissed her from her post as vice president along with 8 ministers thought to be close to her. Mugabe replaced her with Emerson Dambuzo Mnangagwa, also known as Gare, meaning crocodile in Shona language. Popular among veterans, Mnangagwa led a guerrilla unit called the Crocodile Gang during the liberation struggle. For decades, Mnangagwa executed the wishes of Mugabe without hesitation. As Minister of Security in 1983, he supervised the Gukurahundi massacre in Matebeleland that resulted in deaths of 20,000 people in 9 months. Mnangagwa, a former ally of Grace against Joyce, became the next target for Grace. By choosing Mnangagwa, Mugabe made things harder for himself. Here you have a royal and close crocodile against the first shopper and wife. On their part, they both sought support bases. Mnangagwa had the Lacoste group that comprised of ZANU-PF veterans, while Grace formed the Generation 40, or G40, a group working on generational change by replacing the older officials of the party. The group comprised of ambitious politicians who promoted themselves as younger, savvy, and well-educated ZANU-PF members. G40 and Grace intensified the plan to have Mugabe re-elected and have him resign in favor of Grace, a plan Mugabe fully backed. And so the showdown began. In the early 2017, Grace took Mugabe on exhausting campaign tours for pre-election meetings, as well as holding secret meetings at their Blue Roof residence planning on how to neutralize Mnangagwa, the crocodile. Things got intense between the two factions who had similar ideology, views, and vision. During the campaign meetings, Mugabe frequently fell asleep as Grace and Mnangagwa tore each other apart. In August 2017, during a ZANU-PF youth rally, Mnangagwa consumed ice cream from Grace Mugabe's Gushungo dairy farm. After consumption, he fell seriously ill with rampant vomiting and diarrhea. With his life at risk, he was urgently airlifted to South Africa for emergency treatment. Rumors began to spread that he had died, but he later returned to Zimbabwe. Mnangagwa and his faction accused Grace of lacing his food with poison. When asked about this accusation a few days later, Grace laughed, stating, "Why would I want to kill Mnangagwa? Who is Mnangagwa on this earth? Killing someone my husband made? It doesn't make any sense." The crocodile and his wife were later seen at public occasions refusing to eat any food served by waiters. As the campaign trail continued, verbal insults and attacks got worse. In October, while in Bulawayo, Grace launched another attack at the vice president, stating, "Traitors and usurpers will be eliminated." Mnangagwa replied a month later indirectly at a rally attacking Grace. The First Lady quickly jumped out of her chair to deliver a new diatribe to a crowd mostly made of veterans. The crowd exploded in jeers and boos while waving hundreds of toy crocodiles, Mnangagwa's insignia. President Mugabe, who at that time had been sleeping, woke up amid the screams and intervened, stating, "You insult and denigrate the First Lady on behalf of Mnangagwa? All right, I will fire him." On the 6th of November, Mnangagwa was dismissed, excluded from the party, and his personal bodyguard disarmed. To Mnangagwa, this was an obvious message that his arrest was imminent. So, the next day he left Harare, the capital, disguised in his wife's king sunglasses and a wide safari hat. He headed towards the Mozambican border in the company of his 3 sons and a handful of bodyguards. With him was a Louis Vuitton bag containing $8,000 in small bills that he used to bribe his way to Mozambique and later Johannesburg in South Africa. While in exile, Mnangagwa made a statement to Grace and Mugabe saying, "ZANU-PF is not personal property for you and your wife to do as you please." Now that the crocodile was out of the way, President Mugabe was scheduled to appoint his wife as vice president in a grand ceremony. With the excitement, Grace Mugabe made preparations for the grand ceremony, but nothing would go as planned. Up until this point, they hadn't done anything much about the army. So, Mugabe, fearing a coup d'etat, fired the chief of army staff, General Constantine Chiwenga. This would be Mugabe's biggest error in his 37-year presidency. The journal had earlier criticized Mugabe, stating, "The current purging, which is clearly targeting members of the party with a liberation background, must stop forthwith." He also threatened that the army would step in if the purge did not stop. At the time of firing, Chiwenga was heading back to Zimbabwe from China. On the 12th of November, as he touched down at Harare airport, a squadron of police officers waited to arrest him. However, Chiwenga was one step ahead of Mugabe and the First Lady. He had members of the special forces loyal to him disguised as airport maintenance staff. They surrounded the police officers with their weapons drawn. Taken completely by surprise, the police officers were instantly disarmed, detained, and their weapons tucked away. Chiwenga was then escorted off the plane and driven straight to the army headquarters in Harare. From there, Chiwenga makes a phone call to President Mugabe, saying, "What have you done?" "What do you mean?" "Why did you try to arrest me?" "I know nothing about it." Chiwenga hangs up in complete anger. For Chiwenga, this was the ultimate betrayal. So, the following day, he reached out to Mnangagwa. Together with other senior officers, they launched Operation Restore Legacy, whose major purpose was to overthrow Mugabe and prevent Grace Mugabe's appointment. On the 14th of November, Mugabe chaired his last meeting as president with his ministers. That same day, Chiwenga and Mnangagwa overthrew Mugabe in a surprise coup before Grace could be inaugurated as the vice president the following day. On the morning of the 21st of November, Zimbabwean deputies who were staunch supporters of Mugabe voted to dismiss him from ZANU-PF. That same afternoon, Robert Mugabe resigned for a 10 million signing bonus, legal immunity, and a promise that the couple's property would not be seized, ending his 37-year rule of Zimbabwe. The next day, Emmerson Mnangagwa returned to Harare. His first gesture was to reward the three generals who ran the operation. Chiwenga was appointed vice president, Perence Shiri became the minister of lands, Sibusiso Moyo took over as minister of foreign affairs. To this day, Grace Mugabe could not understand how the plan could have gone so wrong. On the 6th of September 2019, Robert Mugabe died aged 95 at Glen Eagles Hospital in Singapore. His death would be the last fight between the new president Mnangagwa and Grace Mugabe. The government under Mnangagwa wanted Mugabe to be buried at the National Heroes Acre, where a monument was constructed for him alongside other Zimbabwean heroes. However, Grace wanted him buried at his rural homestead in Kutama. In the end, he was buried in a courtyard ceremony in his village attended by 200 people. Mnangagwa did not attend. With Mugabe's ousting and death, Grace failed to manage the numerous properties they had amassed, with many of the farms falling into disrepair or being offered up for lease. Gushungo Dairy Farm collapsed after Neso refused to continue buying milk from the farm. Its farming equipment was auctioned in 2019 to clear some debts, while other parts were leased out. At the Grace Mugabe Foundation, the same situation took place. The foundation ended a sizable chunk of the employees' contracts. During Mugabe's land reform in 2000, no individual was supposed to own more than one farm, as per the constitution. Nevertheless, when a land audit was carried out by the government in 2019 after Mugabe's overthrow, it revealed that Mugabe and his wife had amassed between 13 to 20 farms during his time in power. In 2018, an investigation was launched into Dr. Grace Mugabe's PhD that she acquired from the University of Zimbabwe in a record time of 3 months. Up until this point, holding the world record for the shortest time to acquire a PhD. After the investigations, the university vice-chancellor, Levi Nyagula, was convicted of awarding a fake degree to the former First Lady. In January 2020, a massive exodus of students, teachers and parents took place at the flagship school, the Amai Mugabe School, citing a wide array of problems from ill treatment to poor working conditions. The STEM program that costed the government over $200,000 per year was shut down by the Mnangagwa administration, hitting a heavy blow to the project. In 2020, Emmerson Mnangagwa came to the rescue of Grace, where he promulgated a statutory instrument 261, which stipulated the benefits to be enjoyed by the former First Ladies. These included business class trip, an entertainment allowance as determined by the President, a diplomatic passport, office accommodation as may be determined by the President, among others. All this to give Grace a sigh of relief for now. All said and done, the story of Grace Mugabe should be a lesson for all African current First Ladies and First Ladies to be. On the other hand, it paints a picture of politics and business, where leaders use their positions of power to loot from their countries and try to create businesses whose survival is based on their stay in power. That's why the richest people in several African states are all politicians and government officials. The moment they lose political power, the wealth and businesses they created vanish with them, and so they try to hang on to protect their loot. The fall of Gucci Grace from grace to grass was indeed inevitable after Mugabe's overthrow and death. In politics, unlike religion, the dead do not protect the living. The machinations and greed of Gucci Grace are finally over. However, the takeover by Emmerson Mnangagwa justifies that in Zimbabwe, things move, but nothing changes.